Now that we've familiarized ourselves with the interface for Rhino, let's start to use some of the tools, specifically the drawing aids to help us design better. Before we do anything else, let's look at the basic grid we have in the background over here. This grid is a visual reference to help us design, but we don't actually have to interact with it if we don't want to. It's just a visual reference. That's why if you zoom out far enough, you'll see our grid ends. That doesn't mean your design is going to fall off or disappear or anything strange. It's simply just the end of the grid. You can make that grid bigger or smaller if you wanted to. Now, the fastest way I find of accessing the settings for this to change the grid size is simply over here, right-clicking on Auto down there and clicking on Settings, and you'll get this pop-up menu. This allows you to set all the parameters of your document and how you interact with it. You can click on Grid over there, and now you see the grid options for this document. Now, all we have to do is increase the grid line count, and we'll have a larger grid. We can also change every how many millimeters do we have an actual grid line, and every how many millimeters do we have a major grid line. So I like to work on 10 millimeters for a major grid line and 1 millimeter for every grid line. So if you zoom in now, you'll see there's a thick line every 10 lines. That means every 10 millimeters. Now, while I mention that, I'm saying I'm working in millimeters, it's always good to confirm that you are actually designing in the unit that you want to work in. Now, as we are in South Africa, and this is fairly standardized, we mostly work in millimeters because we don't design giant objects. So if you have a look at the very bottom left corner of your document, you'll see you're designing in millimeters. All right, so let's start to design something and then use our drawing aids to complete our design. Because we're working in millimeters and we're going to be working mostly two-dimensionally, I'm going to go ahead and maximize my top viewport and zoom in a little bit. And I'm going to start with the very first curve tool we're going to start with. And that is second from the top over there. You'll see all of these tools have a little triangle next to them, or most of these tools have a little triangle next to them. That means there are other tools hidden underneath it. We access those tools by simply left-clicking on that little arrow, and you'll see all the tools that are hidden underneath it. Now we're going to start off with firstly, we have the single line tool, which helps us draw a line by defining 2 points. I'm going to select that. Now, you'll see I can start anywhere I want to. We don't have to start on the grid lines. I can click once, move my cursor anywhere else, and click again. And now I've drawn a line. I know it's a line because I can select the object. Like in our previous video, I can click on my details, my object properties tab, and I'll see a dialog box that tells me it's a valid curve. Okay, I'm going to close that out. But my line is not straight, and I have no specific definition for where I'd like to end or start it. If I wanted to draw a line that connects to that, I can click on the same line tool again, and I can't really find the start. Now, I can zoom in as far as I want, but it's very hard to click and have it start in the same position. So I'm going to zoom in all the way, and you'll see these lines don't actually touch. And that later on will become a very, very, very big problem because these objects won't actually interact, which won't allow us to design a valid closed poly surface, which will be very problematic down the line. So I'm going to go ahead and delete those. I'm going to select that same polyline or that same line tool again. But I'm going to draw your attention up to the command line. This is the first time you're seeing this. The command line here tells you which tool you have active and what your options are for using that tool. It also tells you what you should be doing next. So because I have the tool active, it tells me define the start of the line. I can start it anywhere. I would like to make sure I start on a grid line and am able to draw it square. So over here at the bottom of my window, I see these words. These are my drawing aids. Now the very first one says grid snap. If I click it, it becomes darker, and you'll see now my cursor snaps to intersections between those grid lines. Oh, that's handy. So I click once there, and now I can draw outwards. Now I can draw outwards in any direction, but I can now use the grid lines to draw a straight line. There we go. Select my line, and you can see it's perfectly straight, and it starts at the intersection of that grid. Now it's very easy to start again from that end and draw down to here. But let's say I want to draw a line at 45 degrees, or 25 degrees, or 30 degrees. It's kind of hard to know exactly at which angle I'm drawing this. I can now use another drawing aid, which is ortho, or short for orthogonal. I can select that and say I want to set the ortho angle. I right click it and it says set ortho angle, so I click that. Now up in my command line, it allows me to enter the ortho angle I want. So I'm going to type in 45 and hit enter. And now if I draw a line, it only allows me to draw at 45-degree angles. So there, or there. Now I can set that ortho to any angle I want and draw a line at exactly that angle, which is quite handy. Now next up, my next drawing aid, I won't really notice if I'm working in 2D. So I'm going to use all of my viewports. And you'll see, well, all of these seem to be on the same plane, but I can accidentally draw here. Where did my line go? There's my line. I can draw here. If I select this line, it's way over there, not anywhere near. It looks like it's right next to my line I drew earlier, but it's quite far away, and it's not on the same plane. So if I select planar, and I draw a line here, and I draw another line here, I know those lines are right on the same plane, which makes my life a lot easier. Now, I also use the handy little trick there. If you hit enter or you right click, it reactivates the same tool you had active earlier. So I'm not even going to go click there. All I have to do is I can hit enter and I get the same line tool again. Or I can right click and I get the same line tool again. It saves you time, so you don't have to go and click on the same tool over and over and over again, which is quite handy. Now again, I want to get rid of these lines, so I'm just going to drag across all of those. And this is actually a handy time to show you this. If I select those halfway, I drag out halfway across them, let go. It only selects the object I had fully within that bounding box. But if I draw out from the right to left, even if they only touch, it selects those. So it's a handy way of discerning between what you would like to select and what you wouldn't. So dragging from left to right, only stuff that's fully enclosed within the bounding box will be selected. If I drag from right to left, anything that touches the bounding box will be selected. Okay, so I'm going to select everything and press delete. Next, and probably the most useful tool in Rhino you're ever going to use, is your object snaps, shortened as O-snaps. So I'm going to click that. Next up, I'm going to use the polyline tool instead of the single line tool this time. So right next to that is the polyline tool. Now again, if I look at my command line, it says define start of polyline. So I'm going to click and drag out, and now it says define next point of polyline. So technically, I could keep drawing and drawing and drawing and drawing. So it does the same thing as the earlier tool, the single line tool, but it allows me to make multiple single lines in one go, which is just fast, saves you time. So I'm going to draw out a basic shape. You can too. Delete that. I'm going to draw out just a basic shape using my polyline tool. You can draw any shape you want, like that. Now, when you're done with the polyline tool, to deactivate it, because you don't want to draw any more lines, you can either hit enter or right click, and it deselects the polyline tool for you. Now, let's say I want to start from that end there, but how can I be sure it actually connects to it? If I turn on my O-snaps like that, I get these options extra here. They allow me to snap to specific things. So I'm going to tick the end snap. Then I'm going to zoom out, and I'm going to select the polyline tool again. What happens now is as I zoom in, as I get anywhere near the end of that, it automatically snaps to it and says, that's the end. So I click once, my line has been started, and I want to connect these two. So I hover over there, and automatically it snaps to that. You'll see that's where my ortho line used to be, my 45-degree line used to be. But if I hover over there, it snaps to it. So it draws at a completely different angle, but it makes sure it connects those two ends. All right. Now, next up, we have a lot of different options for what I'd like to snap to. Near snaps to almost anything, so make sure it touches it. So if I hover anywhere near there, it says near, which means it'll touch that line. Point is useful if I want to snap to a specific point. Mid allows me to divide something in half, so I'm going to use this line there. Hover near the middle, and it'll say mid, so it marks it. That's the midpoint of this specific line. I can do center. I can do intersection, so where it actually touches something else. So if I use the polyline tool for that, because that my intersection tool is active, it'll say that's both the end, the mid, and the intersection. Perpendicular allows you to draw lines that are parallel. Tangent, you can draw a line from the quadrant of a circle, a knot, or a vertex. And lastly, we can project. If things aren't on the same plane, we can project onto something else as if they were touching. And lastly, if I need to get rid of all of these, I can temporarily disable them by ticking the disable box. All right, so these drawing aids you're going to use every single time you design. So I'm not going to hammer too much on them. We'll use them every time we create a design or use a new tool. So you'll get them sorted very, very quickly. All right, so that's your drawing aids and how we might interact with a basic design. See you in the next one.